Well, it is clear that there are interesting developments here, interesting dynamics that are playing out in the South African political landscape, and particularly we are looking at as the South African opposition landscape and some of the shifts that we are starting to witness, and focusing on some of the parties in particular. And the one this morning that we want to talk about is the EFF, the Economic Freedom Fighters. Now, there have been many questions that have been raised and saying that is this the end of the EFF? And we've seen a number of leaders that have actually left the party. We've seen claims by Julius Malema talking about Dali Mpofu wanting to dissolve the EFF and unite behind a Zuma-led party. And that seems to be the very latest that had actually come out. Obviously, with Dali Mpofu proposing dissolving the EFF, but more importantly, we've seen Dali Mpofu himself, who had left the EFF. We've seen Floyd Chivambu. We've seen a number of leaders. So something is clearly brewing within the EFF. And this morning, we are going to unpack and trying to understand and analyze what all of this actually means. Are we going to see the beginning of the end of the EFF with renowned Zimbabwean anti-sanctions activist Rutendo Matinyarare? Rutendo, good morning to you, sir. As always, we do appreciate your time. We welcome you to the show.
Thank you very much, Yanayet. How are you doing?
Yes, now doing exceptionally well. In fact, obviously, we are following a lot of developments right across the entire world. We've just seen the outcome of the US elections, the Trump return. Again, earlier on, we were talking about Botswana, a party after 50 odd years in power, now removed from power. And these political dynamics seem to be changing all the time, but very, very interesting times that we are living in. And here in South Africa, we're now looking at opposition landscape. We're talking about the EFF, and just looking at what has been taking place since the elections, what has been playing out in the EFF, Julius Malema, leaders from within the party, obviously leaving the party as well. Just your reading into the situation, what is actually happening, what is taking place with Tender?
Well, I'm one of those people that have always said that Julius Malema and the EFF were not really revolutionaries. A lot of people have heard the rhetoric, they've heard the way they speak, and they've assumed that EFF, Julius Malema, and the other leaders that were in that political party were actually revolutionaries. But I was one of the first people to start pointing out that they're not revolutionaries. They're actually people created by white monopoly to stand in the gap of being revolutionaries and to be given all the limelight by the media to shut out other much more revolutionary voices so that they would not have a place. And then Julius Malema would be able to take the aspirations of the black youth and black people of South Africa while apartheid was being maintained in the country so that white supremacy could continue to achieve its objectives. And I think many people heard that argument. And that's why Jacob Zuma could have joined EFF to form a revolutionary movement to go against the ANC and to try and consolidate the black vote behind EFF. But I think this argument that Julius Malema is a fake revolutionary was actually heard by many people who decided that they were going to create an alternative to the EFF to actually take up the real revolutionary space within South Africa, to take the aspirations of the people and to take the aspirations for freedom of the South African people to a logical conclusion. Now, whether MK can be able to maintain or whether it's also going to fall into the same trap where few people start getting money and then they start also playing to the agenda of the neoliberals, we are yet to see. But currently, I believe that MK has become the alternative. That's why a lot of leaders are now running away from this hollow revolutionary movement, a pretense revolutionary movement, into something that they hope would be more revolutionary to change the lives of African people.
Well, I've seen one of your comments, and I must say it's a very, very interesting comment. And you're talking about, you saying that the EFF was a Trojan horse serving white interests. Now, this obviously was a very, very interesting comment at this point, at that point in time as well. And this came at a time also when talks were taking place between the EFF and looking at obviously becoming a meaningful opposition, like you mentioned, a revolutionary opposition in the true sense of the word, Rutendo.
Yes, the problem that we do see, however, in it, especially with black people in South Africa, black politicians, those in the ANC, those within MK, those within EFF, is there's a tendency of materialism. And there is no revolution that will ever be run by materialistic people, because materialistic people will be prone to be bought for the interests of those who've got money. And that's why you've seen that even in the ANC, you had people being bought to vote for certain leaders and to forget the revolutionary or the principles of the party. And hence we're in the quagmire that we're in, that there is absolutely no one really standing up for black aspirations, trying to dismantle apartheid and trying to change the status quo for black people to start having self-determination in this country, because people are materialistic. So this is what we also saw with the EFF. And it was always going to be like that. As long as the leaders of EFF were wearing Gucci and they wanted to drive expensive cars and they wanted to drink expensive cognac, they were always going to be prone to be bought by white monopoly and capital. And this is what we're also starting to say. We hope that MK is not going to be exactly on the same path, because at some point there has to be some form of self-sacrifice for revolutionary movements to take the revolution forward. And that's why Fanon always said that the revolution would never be taken by the middle class, but it will only be taken by the poor, who are actually suffering to take themselves out of poverty and exploitation to become much more than what it is that they've been designated to be by capitalism and imperialism.
I think, Rutendo, against what you are saying, and I think this raises a question as to how politically mature uh, is society in general, is the South African voter, because to a large extent, and this has been my observation, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, it's been all about personalities. When one looks at the EFF, it's about Julius Malema as a personality. When one looks at the MK, we're looking at Jacob Zuma as a personality. The same can be said about the ANC and Cyril Ramaphosa and also his predecessors. And this, unfortunately, is the case in South Africa, where we get taken over, we get blown over sometimes by these personalities, but without being politically mature, without truly understanding as to who they really are and what they represent.
And this is what Hitler defined as the lack of sophistication of the African. When he was writing in Mein Kampf, he says, it is not a case of the black man not being intelligent or smart enough like the white man, but it is him being unsocially unevolved to a point where he doesn't understand the importance of creating groupings, and for those groupings to advance the interests of the people or the race in order for them to take the revolution forward. And so you look at it that it doesn't start now. When you look back at Shagazul, you look at Bambata, you look at Sikukuni, a lot of these people were about personalities, and these tribes were run by these personalities that then overtook what should have become a national fight, a national struggle that should have been continued from generation to generation, with groups of people coming together to take that fight forward. There was always individualism, and this individualism was rallied around a persona of a person who oftentimes did not have the race interest, group interest, or national interest. As such struggles were always easy to suppress. This is why you see that even when the Zulus and the Ndebeles went to attack in Botswana, Botswana was a smaller group of people. The Bangwato were small, but they defeated them because they were more united and more about the group preservation, much more than the personalities of individuals or power generals that wanted to take over the clans of other people and the properties of other people. And that's what we still see till today. So the question is it a Southern African culture? Is it a South African culture? And if it is, what needs to happen to change it? and transform it to make this more of a group and national interest that can become an ideology that's spread through or can pass from generation to generation, get improved to be able to benefit the mass or the collective aspirations of the group in a future period. Currently, we've seen personalities, individuals who have got a warlord mentality that seems to be about individual benefit. Hence, we have seen the frustration of these aspirations at every single juncture because they're not about the group, but about individuals who are serving their own personal interests and gain.
Yes, just coming back to the EFF, where does this leave the EFF at this point in time? Where does it leave someone like Julius Malema? And again, right up front, where I asked that question, are we beginning to see the end of the EFF?
We are potentially seeing the end of the EFF because it's the whole reason why it got the support of particularly young Africans is young Africans thought that they had found a political party that actually has an ideology to emancipate Africans and to put Africans in the rightful position where they take control of the resources that they lost to colonialism, and they're emancipated politically to actually begin to rule, govern, and have equity in the spoils of the South African economy. But what it is that people have realized is that Julius Malema has been building up the expectation that he will lead people into a revolution that will eventually allow Black people to take their place and position in society. But that rhetoric has ended as rhetoric and never really gone into real action. And so because nothing is materializing from this rhetoric, the youth are seeing their parents live and die, and they too are beginning to live, and they might actually get to a point of dying without getting anything that they were hoping for. So hence they're now starting to think maybe we need a different vehicle to give us independence. And like I said, to me, Julius Malema was actually created by white by white people to be a valve for the pressure and frustration of Black people. So when Black people are about to explode, when they're beginning to think that it's about time that we just do whatever it takes for us to start the revolution, Julius Malema will be there to release the pressure by saying a few interesting words, talking about how independence will come at some point, talking about how they will take land at some point. But now some people are looking back and saying, for 15 years, we've heard this man saying this. For 10 years in the EFF, he's been saying this. When will the revolution come? But while they're waiting, they're seeing him making a lot of money, getting properties, driving big cars, wearing expensive clothes. And the question is, when will he eventually undertake the revolution? And many people are beginning to see he won't undertake the revolution because as long as they support him, he can be in parliament buying all the expensive things he wants. He can have political capital that he can use to get paychecks from whoever is giving him the paychecks in the background. But that will never transform into a revolution because he doesn't want a revolution because he's already comfortable. So I think people have seen that. And that's why they're now looking for an alternative. The youth are now looking for an alternative. And people like myself saying it in public, defining what Julius Malema stands for and his selfish intentions, they've actually made a lot of young people start saying, we now need a change. We now need another vehicle that's going to take us into the promised land.
Well, what you're saying is, and we're not only talking about South Africa, and I think right across the entire African continent, where we look at South Africa, a relatively young population that we've got. In fact, a large portion of the population is made up of young people. We've just seen Botswana come out of an election, and we've seen this major shift as well, where 70% of the Botswana population are young people, 35 and under as well. And young people are starting to notice, they're starting to take stock of what is happening, what they see around them, what politicians are actually doing. And young people are the people who will lead this revolution that you speak of, Rutendo.
To a certain extent, yes. My problem with the young people is that the governments in Africa have made one critical mistake, allowing DSTV, American TV, Canal France Plus to lead the narratives and to basically manufacture the consent on the African continent. So they determine the aspirations of our youth. And the aspirations of our youth are very materialistic. Everyone among the youth is not trying to take the entire class of youth or blackness out of poverty. Each one is trying to take themselves out of poverty. And by so doing and having such aspirations, capital can always buy certain clever youths, take them out of poverty and make them elite. And once they do that, these youth forget about where they came from. And then Julius Malema is a quintessential example. He came from Sesheko as a young revolutionary, fired up by poverty and wanting to actually emancipate his people. But the moment he started being given little trappings, being given money, and being given this material things that he really wanted, he forgot about the revolution. He forgot about the poor. He forgot about driving the revolution that people thought he would be able to drive. And that is the problem with most youth in Africa, because they are being nurtured on hip hop. They're being nurtured on watching Puff Daddy and P. Diddy. And these are the people that build this materialistic, self-centered, individualistic culture that no longer renders to create a revolutionary who's going to be self-sacrificing, a Sheikh Guvar who could leave his family as a doctor, leave his riches as a family to actually go and live in the bushes because he actually wanted to see the ideology of the emancipation of the poor. That is not what you're going to see in Africa, because what our youth are being nurtured on and the televisions that they're watching, the music they're listening to, the videos they watch are all about individual progress and individual sustenance. It is also in our schooling system where everybody wants to be number one. They want to leave everybody else behind. So what that causes is it destroys the ability for these young people to create group dynamics or teamwork in order to advance the entire group. It creates a situation where we use groups as individuals to benefit, and once the person benefits, he ascends to a higher elite class and then forgets about the revolution and the people below him that he was supposedly supposed to be leading to an outcome for an entire group. And that is the problem that we're seeing in Africa. And what's sad is it's not only in Africa, even in the Middle East, where we used to think that the Muslim revolution is stronger and it is based on a religious backing, we're also sometimes seeing that certain Muslims are being split into groups. ISIS over here, this over there, sponsored by the West, and even the divisions we're seeing among Arab nations within the Middle East, where some of them are supporting Israel, some of them are supporting America. It's an example of how individualism through culture, the culture of television and Western television, has actually destroyed the revolution all across the board. And we need to go back to the drawing board to try and get back that whole notion that a people should struggle to free themselves from a system of oppression by sacrificing the individual benefits and needs and satisfactions.
And I think all what you're saying is very, very true because, again, it stems from an ideology that one subscribes to. And this dominant capitalist ideology, we've seen over the years South Africa becoming more capitalist than some of the capitalist nations themselves, the Western nations. We see this great divide, South Africa being one of the most unequal societies in the world. You mentioned the Arab states as well, the political elite versus the masses as well. It's an us and them scenario, and this is a trend that is continuing. And as long as we subscribe to this ideology of capitalism, we won't be making any progress whatsoever. Again, this is where this ideology, under the guise of so-called democracy, there is no democracy, there is no social justice. And I think this is absolutely critical. This is important. And this is what we truly need to understand, that leaders will not mete out social justice as they promise or as they put in fancy terms at the times of elections, in their manifestos. All of this is just empty rhetoric.
100%. And this is why even on the backdrop of the American elections, it's funny that people think that the leaders that they were electing are the people who determine the way forward or the leadership and policy of the nation. They don't understand that these elected puppets are just exactly that. They're just puppets put in front of them to feel like they're participating in a democratic system. But at the end of the day, the nation of America, together with South Africa and every other nation, are governed by non-elected people. And those non-elected people, sometimes called shadow government, they're called business, they're called the combine. These are business interests that actually believe in utilizing the people that vote as fodder, utilizing them as a tax base, utilizing them as customers for products, and sometimes even as guinea pigs for some of the toxic and very inimical health products or food products that they're making, that elect a puppet while leaving the people behind the curtain to continue to govern them without being elected. We saw it in South Africa, where most people voted left in South Africa because the majority are poor, and they're hoping that a left-leaning government is what will be able to give them the opportunity to rise and to have equality, equity, and restitution from the imperialism and the capitalist system that continues to exploit them as the base of that system. But you saw capital coming in and pushing that the left must unite with the ultra-right, or even the neo-Nazis to form a government. And that was done by a non-elected group of people putting pressure on the ANC particularly to hold hands with the DA. But yet that is not the kind of developmental state or policy system that is going to advance the people. Because as long as it's an ultra-right system that looks at capitalism as the system that exploits the masses in order for a few to benefit, who happen to be white a lot of times, we are never going to have equality. And that is the same in America. And until we understand that this democracy is an illusion, this democracy is some form of hypnosis, Africans are never going to be able to emancipate themselves, and the downtrodden will never be lifted. Even white downtrodden people never be lifted by a system that is actually there to exploit and suppress a base of people for only a few to benefit at the end of the day. You will see that they'll give you toxic food, poisons, GMOs, chemicals in your food, so that you can be patients to a hospital system that is a $4 trillion industry in America and just equally as big in South Africa, for a few people to make profits from the companies that give those pharmaceuticals and those biotech products that poison the people. So we need to learn that these systems do not work for us. And particularly in Africa, which is the base of the entire global pyramid, if we don't change that system and think that capitalism is going to take us forward, we're going to find ourselves either recolonized or actually annihilated, because at the end of the day, the recolonization is going to come with the genocide of people like what we're currently seeing in Palestine.
Well, Rutendo, I wish we could engage a lot more, but unfortunately, time has run out. But as always, we sincerely appreciate you taking time out, and really a lot of food for thought in the last few minutes that you and I have been talking. And I'm sure many of our listeners, our viewers, have taken note of what they've heard and what has been said. But for now, we thank you. We appreciate your time, and please take care.
Thank you, Unite.
Rutendo Matinyarare was us this morning, and once again, really a very, very explosive, a very, very powerful discourse coming through. Starting off looking at the EFF, but just looking at the EFF, which is just basically the tip of the iceberg of the greater scheme of things that are actually playing out. Next up, Maulana Abdullah Khan joining us for Jumma Nasiha.
We are here in the middle of a Zahra neighborhood. The whole neighborhood is already destroyed. More than 17 towers are down. Here, as you can see, the firefighters trying their best to help. The people are still under the rubble. A lot of the people.
Join Hamza on his exclusive South African tour as he shares his personal experiences, never before seen footage, and powerful insights on the ongoing genocide in Gaza. This is more than just a talk. It's an invitation to witness Gaza through the lens of Hamza Sha'alan. Don't miss this opportunity to meet the photojournalist who brought Gaza's pain and perseverance to the world in its darkest moments. Follow Salam Media on social media pages for more on this tour and be part of the conversation.